On a quiet morning in a rural town, everything seemed perfectly normal until a woman was suddenly dragged away in broad daylight, right before the astonished eyes of the town's only witness. A few minutes later, the peaceful morning atmosphere was shattered into chaos. In front of a small restaurant called Mexican Chicken, two aggressive young men were seen restraining a young woman, Sim-hee, 26, the shop owner. Despite her fierce resistance, they pushed her into a gray car waiting nearby, and in just a few seconds the car sped away before anyone could react. At that moment, the entire neighborhood was still immersed in the silence of the morning. Yoo Suk-ja was the only witness to this horrifying scene. She stood motionless in the middle of the street, trying to regain her composure, before running into her house to call the police. She reported that two men had just forced a woman into a car, and that the woman was the owner of Mexican Chicken. As soon as the call came in, it didn't take long for the story of the daylight kidnapping to spread throughout the town. It was a strange and unprecedented crime in this normally peaceful rural area. Residents were frightened, stunned, and full of questions. Why would someone kidnap Sim-hee, a kind, friendly woman who had always treated her neighbors warmly? Panic spread quickly. People locked their doors. Children were locked in their homes. Housewives whispered in disbelief. How could such a horrible thing happen right in their neighborhood? But just a few hours later, things took a darker turn. When the police arrived at the scene and tried to contact Sim-hee's husband, Seong Byeong-jip, to inform him of what had happened, they discovered that he had also been missing since the previous day. The police immediately launched an urgent investigation. They began with the testimony of the only witness, Suk-ja. According to her, one of the kidnappers had long hair, while the other had curly hair. One of them was about 5 feet 7 inches tall. Unfortunately, she could not remember the license plate number. Investigators quickly turned to the victim's personal life. They discovered that the couple had been married for less than a year. Before moving, Byeong-jip had worked in the sales department of the main branch of a Mexican fried chicken chain in Daegu, while Sim-hee worked as an accountant. After getting married, they moved to Hapshin-yup and opened their own fried chicken shop in hopes of starting a new life together. Due to financial constraints, they rented an old storefront and lived in a small room behind the kitchen. The early days were difficult, but they believed that with hard work, they could make it. After 9 months, they had started saving some money. Their next goal was to move into a better house and start a family. But things began to change on the afternoon of July 22nd. Police confirmed that this was the last time Byeong-jip was seen. After receiving a strange call at the shop, he told his wife that he had to go out, but would be back soon. He never returned. That night, Sim-hee managed the shop alone, growing increasingly worried. As the hours passed without any news, she went to the police to file a report. But their reaction was lukewarm. They assumed he had probably just had a drink and decided to go somewhere. Distraught and overwhelmed, she returned home and stayed up all night, anxiously waiting for news of her husband. But the next morning, before she could collect herself or figure out what to do next, 2 unknown men suddenly appeared, stormed into the shop, and abducted her in broad daylight. From that incident, police quickly concluded that this was part of a larger, coordinated crime. It was likely that Byeong-jip had been lured out and murdered first. Fearing that Sim-hee might report the crime or identify the culprits, the perpetrators returned the next day to abduct her and silence the only possible witness. Just 2 days later, on the afternoon of July 24th, 1993, around 1 p.m., a distress call was made to the Hapcheon County Police Department. On the line was a young man, breathing heavily and clearly panicked, reporting that he had just found a dead body near a creek in the village of Yangju-myeon, within Hapcheon County. The caller was Mr. Yu, a 26-year-old local resident. While walking through the nearby forest to collect firewood, he came across a large moss-covered object near the stream. Thinking it was a dead animal, he moved closer, only to realize, to his horror, that it was a human body. The body was lying on its side, already beginning to decompose slightly in the summer heat, and curiously, it had not been concealed, as if someone had intentionally left it there in plain sight. Upon receiving the report, police rushed to the scene. When an officer shined a flashlight on the face of the deceased, he immediately recognized the victim, Seong Byeong-jip, the very man whose disappearance had been reported by his wife less than 48 hours earlier. A preliminary autopsy was conducted on site. A clear strangulation mark was found on the victim's neck, leading investigators to conclude that the cause of death was asphyxiation from strangulation with a hard object. Surprisingly, there were no other injuries or signs of struggle, something that puzzled investigators, as Byeong-jip was a healthy 26-year-old man in good physical condition. Based on forensic findings, the estimated time of death was early evening on July 22nd, the same day he left the store after receiving the mysterious phone call. This further supported the theory that the killer had lured him outside and murdered him that very day, before returning the next morning to kidnap his wife. With this lead, the investigation turned toward people who were acquainted with the young couple. Police questioned co-workers, friends, relatives, neighbors, and nearby shopkeepers. However, no one reported any personal conflicts or bad blood. In fact, everyone described the couple as kind, gentle, and well-liked in the community. With no personal motive uncovered, police shifted to the theory of robbery-motivated murder. Sure enough, on the morning of July 23rd, just hours after Sim-hee's abduction, $3,700 was withdrawn from her savings account at Nonghyup Bank's Hapcheon branch. Based on the value of money in 1993, that amount represented nearly all of the couple's savings after almost a year of running their small business. Investigators followed the trail to the bank, hoping for a breakthrough. But once again, they hit a dead end. Due to the technology of that time, the bank had no security camera system. In that situation, their only option was to search for eyewitnesses. Because of this, the 3 employees who were on the morning shift that day were brought in for questioning. They all remembered serving a young man who withdrew the entire amount from Sim-hee's savings account, presenting both her passbook and official seal, requirements for withdrawal at the time. However, what shocked investigators was that all 3 gave completely different descriptions of the suspect. Not only were their statements inconsistent, they were almost impossible to reconcile. One employee described the man as tall with short hair. Another insisted he was short with thick, messy hair. The third said he appeared gentle and completely ordinary. Due to these conflicting accounts, police had a hard time creating a composite profile of the suspect. They began narrowing down potential suspects to men in the area with similar physical characteristics and financial hardship. Initially, 8 individuals made the list. However, the verification process quickly narrowed the investigation. The first man was confirmed to be at work, with co-workers backing his alibi. The second was in Seoul with his family. The third was in the hospital recovering from surgery. As for suspects 4 through 8, each had clear and verifiable alibis. Just as it seemed the case had hit a dead end, police received a tip about a man named Choi, 29 years old, living in Chilgok County, North Gyeongsang Province, about 45 miles from Hapcheon. He closely resembled witness descriptions and had previously worked as a chicken delivery driver for the Mexico chicken chain. With this lead, investigators immediately dispatched 2 detectives to Choi's home on the evening of August 6th. He was brought to the station for questioning regarding details related to the case. That very night, Choi, 29 years old, was taken to the Hapcheon County Police Department, where he would begin a long and harrowing chapter of his life. Initially, officers reassured him that if he cooperated, he'd be released shortly. But that promise never came true. Once the interrogation room door closed, a nightmare of torture, coerced confessions, and human rights violations began. From that point on, Choi was held in the interrogation room continuously for 4 days. He was denied sleep, water, and access to leave the room. He was beaten, tied to a chair, and relentlessly interrogated, accused of kidnapping and murder. Though Choi repeatedly insisted he was innocent, no one listened. For the investigators, he was the missing piece they needed to close a high-profile case under mounting public pressure. And yet, the confession they wanted didn't come easily. Despite being physically and mentally broken, Choi maintained his statement. He had never met Sim-hee or Byeong-jip, didn't know the victims, and had no connection to the case. He had no criminal record, no relationship with the couple, and no evidence placed him in Hapcheon on the day of the crime. Meanwhile, doubts about Choi's guilt began to surface outside the station. Neighbors, co-workers, and friends came forward, providing testimony that he was with them from the night of July 22nd through the morning of July 23rd, the exact time frame of the crime. They submitted witness statements, photos, and receipts showing that Choi had been dining and singing karaoke in Chilgok. These pieces of evidence made it clear he could not have been at the scene of the crime. Amid growing public outrage, police were forced to release Choi on August 10th, but the man who walked out of the station was no longer the same. His face was bruised and swollen, he limped as he walked, and not long after, he collapsed and had to be hospitalized. Doctors confirmed that Choi had suffered 2 broken ribs, extensive bruising, and severe psychological trauma. Refusing to suffer in silence, Choi filed a formal complaint with the Gyeongsangnam-do prosecutor's office, demanding an investigation into the unlawful detention and coerced interrogation. The case quickly exploded into one of the biggest scandals in South Korea's law enforcement community during the 1990s. Human rights groups spoke out, and the media uncovered a series of violations committed during the investigation. The damage went far beyond Choi's personal suffering. It also brought the entire investigation to a standstill. Once his innocence was confirmed, police were left with nothing. No new witnesses, no forensic evidence at the scene, and the real perpetrator had vanished without a trace. As a result, the case slowly faded into obscurity, surviving only in the form of whispered rumors throughout Hapcheon. Some believed that Sim-hee had been sold overseas as part of a human trafficking ring. In the 1990s, cases of women being abducted and forced into labor or marriage, often trafficked into China, were not widespread, but they did happen. Others speculated that she had been murdered shortly after the money was withdrawn from her bank account. Despite the various theories, one fact remained undeniable. The perpetrator knew the victim very well. The person knew that Sim-hee kept both her savings passbook and official seal, both required to withdraw money at the time. He knew when she would be alone and was familiar with the couple's daily routine. All of this strongly pointed to the likelihood that the killer was someone close to them. The prolonged silence, combined with a flood of unanswered questions, ultimately turned this case into a stain on South Korea's investigative history. A double disappearance with no suspect, no clear motive, and no solid leads. Despite hundreds of hours spent on interrogations, interviews, and distributing flyers across the Gyeongsangnam region, the case was officially suspended in 1994 due to a lack of evidence. But then, in mid-1994, almost a year after the case was closed, an unexpected twist emerged from the Nongkyup Bank branch in Hapcheon County. Mr. Nam, a longtime employee who had worked the morning of July 23, 1993, the exact day Sim-hee disappeared, sent a letter to the Gyeongsangnam-do Provincial Investigation Office. In his letter, he wrote that he wasn't entirely certain, but he believed he had recently recognized the man who made the withdrawal that day. He claimed to have seen the man again at an auto repair shop in Hamon County. That brief handwritten note immediately caught the attention of investigators. Previously, statements from bank employees had been contradictory and deemed unreliable. But this time, Mr. Nam had taken the initiative to reach out, suggesting his memory had been triggered by a strong visual impression. Following the details in the letter, investigators traced the lead to an auto repair shop off National Route 5, about 30 miles from Hapcheon County. There, they met a man named Kang, 32 years old, with a prior conviction for fraud and currently working as a mechanic. His appearance, including his tall frame and curly hair, was a striking match to the original sketch provided by witness Sukja and the bank employee. Continuing the investigation, police conducted discreet surveillance and discovered that Kang had previously lived in the city of Gumi. In the period just before the crime occurred, he had been in contact with a man named Jung, who had once worked as a delivery driver for the Mexico chicken chain in Daegu, where the victim couple had also worked. From there, investigators uncovered a connection between the two. Jung and Kang had both been arrested for petty theft in Gumi back in 1991. After being released, they disappeared from all police records. Now, both were living quietly in small rural counties within Gyeongsangnam province. This connection turned out to be critical. Investigators learned that both Jung and Kang were familiar with the victim couple, particularly with the operations of the fried chicken shop and Lee Sim-hee's daily routine. Based on these links and supporting evidence, on November 3, 1994, police arrested both men on suspicion of theft and murder. However, at the police station, both men denied all charges. They claimed they did not know Lee Sim-hee or Seong Byeong-jip and had no knowledge of the $3,700 withdrawn from the bank. Despite the police presenting evidence such as witness testimony from bank employees, police sketches, and accounts from people who had seen them near the crime scene, all of it was circumstantial. Nothing was concrete enough to press formal charges. As a result, police once again faced the same dilemma. No confession, no physical evidence, and no direct eyewitnesses. In the end, both men were released after a few weeks in custody. Still, despite the lack of legal grounds to prosecute, police quietly placed them on a long-term watch list. Time passed in silence, and the people of Hapcheon gradually let the memory of that case fade, remembering only fragments. A young wife who vanished, a husband who was murdered, a culprit never caught, and an investigation riddled with errors. For the victim's family, especially Lee Sim-hee's parents, the pain endured, unresolved and unanswered. As the years went by, the 15-year statute of limitations quietly ticked away. By July 2008, the case officially expired. This meant that even if the perpetrator came forward, they could no longer be prosecuted under the law. But this case would eventually circle back, rewinding time more than a decade to a night that had gone largely unnoticed. At 12:20 a.m. on March 2, 1998, the Byeong Fire Department received a call reporting a fire at a small CD store in the Dodang-dong neighborhood. When they arrived, they found the shutter pulled down and the entrance locked. Firefighters were forced to break through the door. Fortunately, the flames hadn't spread and were extinguished in time. Police arrived on the scene and began inspecting the smoke-filled rubble with flashlights. In a hidden corner, they found a body, its head covered with a blanket. Upon removing it, they discovered the victim's face had been tightly wrapped in a plastic bag with 2 layers of fabric wound around it. From the ankles to the chest, the body was bound in cloth strips and secured with packing tape, clear signs that this was no ordinary fire victim. Given the condition of the body, investigators noted that the victim appeared almost mummified. This raised suspicions that the fire had been deliberately set to destroy evidence and cover up a homicide. The victim was identified as Mr. Kim, 39 years old, the owner of the CD store. The autopsy revealed that he had died from severe blunt force trauma to the head and multiple bone fractures. Based on the initial forensic findings, police immediately began examining the scene. However, due to the heavy smoke and the forceful use of water during firefighting, the technical limitations at the time made it impossible to recover any valuable physical evidence. A follow-up autopsy also revealed no defensive wounds on the victim, suggesting he had not resisted his attacker. This unusual detail led police to suspect that Mr. Kim may have been drugged or rendered unconscious before being killed. However, toxicology results showed no traces of drugs in his system, meaning he likely endured the assault fully conscious. This fueled the theory that the killer may have had a personal grudge and acted out of rage. Following this line of reasoning, police expanded their investigation to include people close to Mr. Kim. The first suspect was his wife, identified as Ms. A, 36 years old. Firefighters had found the store's rolling shutter down when they arrived, a sign that the perpetrator may have been someone familiar with the layout and knew how to enter and exit without detection. Further investigation uncovered a life insurance policy Mr. Kim had taken out, which included a special clause. If he suffered a head injury, the payout would be $57,900, and if he died as a result of a crime or accident, the total benefit could rise to $289,600. Notably, the sole beneficiary of the policy was Ms. A fact that gave police even more reason to consider her a primary suspect. However, during questioning, Ms. A appeared genuinely shocked by the existence of the insurance policy and claimed she had no knowledge of it. She also provided a verifiable alibi for the time of the crime, forcing investigators to temporarily remove her from the suspect list. This turn of events prompted police to reevaluate the crime scene from a different angle. Upon reviewing the remaining evidence, they found it unconvincing to treat the case as a simple robbery. If the motive had truly been money, there would have been no need to go to such lengths to wrap the victim's body so thoroughly. Based on that conclusion, authorities expanded the pool of suspects and began investigating all individuals with close ties to the victim. During this process, they took note of a young man who had frequently been seen near the scene, Seong, 26 years old, who lived in a small room on the top floor of Mr. Kim's building. What made Seong stand out was his long-standing relationship with the victim. He had lived upstairs for nearly 7 years and was considered almost like family. In recent years, he had even been helping Mr. Kim with work at the CD store on a regular basis. Given such a close relationship, one would expect Seong to be devastated by Mr. Kim's death. Yet at the time, Seong showed no visible signs of shock or sorrow. He simply stood on the sidelines of the investigation, watching with a detached, indifferent expression, like someone entirely uninvolved. At first, this aloofness could have been dismissed, but it soon drew attention when Seong suddenly became defensive, especially when police began to suspect Mr. Kim's wife, Ms. A. It was at that moment, using their investigative instincts, the officers sensed something was off about Seong demeanor. They immediately shifted their focus and began questioning him more directly. Where had he been, and what was he doing the night of the murder? From that point forward, the interrogation deepened. Seong claimed he had slept alone in his upstairs room on the night of the crime, but there was no one to corroborate his story. Police searched his personal belongings and quickly discovered a critical clue: a message on his phone urging him to run away, sent by none other than Ms. A. Rather than confront Seong about the contents of the message directly, detectives cut straight to the heart of the matter. They looked him in the eye and asked in a cold, measured tone, as if a confession was inevitable, "Why did you do it?" Under pressure, Seong covered his face with his hands, visibly distressed. After a few minutes of silence, he calmed down and began to confess. He admitted that he alone was responsible for the crime and insisted that Ms. A had no involvement whatsoever. Following his confession, police searched the upstairs room where Seong had been living. There, they uncovered a disturbing setup. One corner of the room contained several live feed monitors displaying real-time footage from various parts of a home, images of a living room, kitchen, and bedroom, indicating that someone was being watched without their knowledge. Upon inspecting the system further, police discovered that the live footage was being transmitted from surveillance cameras secretly installed by Seong inside Mr. Kim's residence on the floor below. He had been covertly monitoring every private moment of the couple's life. To understand the deeper motivations behind this disturbing behavior, investigators had to revisit the history between Seong and the couple, particularly Ms. A, dating back 7 years. Seong had a troubled childhood, growing up in a relative's home and never knowing who his biological parents were. By the time he turned 19, he moved to Seoul on his own to survive. With no access to higher education, he took on a variety of jobs, manual labor, lottery ticket sales, and more. During this period, he met Ms. A, who was then running a comic book shop. Recognizing his difficult circumstances, she helped him multiple times and gave him opportunities to stabilize his life. Coming from a background of emotional deprivation, Seong was quickly drawn to the kindness and attention Ms. A had shown him. What began as gratitude slowly evolved into affection, and before long, he had developed romantic feelings for her, though silently and without her knowledge. In contrast to the hidden emotions Seong was harboring, Ms. A had no idea how he felt. To her, he was simply like a younger brother. She introduced him to her husband, Mr. Kim, who, after learning about Seong's background, allowed him to live in the upstairs room and work at the CD store. It was during those years living under the same roof that Seong began to closely observe the couple's relationship. He gradually came to realize that Mr. Kim was not the ideal husband many believed him to be. Back in their hometown, Mr. Kim had been a successful farmer, and from the outside, it looked like they lived a happy, stable life. But in truth, Ms. A had once had an affair, a betrayal that left deep emotional scars on Mr. Kim. When rumors of the affair spread through the village, Mr. Kim, unable to bear the social pressure, abandoned farming and moved the family to Busan. Starting over in a new city wasn't easy. Carrying shame and emotional wounds, he grew increasingly irritable. As a husband, he could never forgive his wife, and neighbors often heard him yelling at Miss A in public. While Mr. Kim was consumed by resentment, Im Seong-pil experienced a very different kind of emotional turmoil. Ms. A had once shown him kindness and support, while her husband frequently scolded and at times even hit him. This left Seong-pil feeling resentful and angry. That's when he began secretly installing surveillance cameras throughout their home and quietly monitoring their daily lives. As his obsession grew, Seong-pil began eavesdropping on their conversations and even recording their intimate moments to watch them later. He became so fixated that he memorized Ms. A's daily routines, rushing to help her carry heavy trash bags, bringing her food when she seemed sad. Over time, this quiet attention touched her heart, and the two began a secret affair. Because of this questionable relationship, police initially suspected that Mr. Kim's death was the result of a conspiracy, Im Seong-pil and Ms. A working together to murder him for the life insurance payout. However, Seong-pil adamantly denied her involvement and claimed she had nothing to do with the crime. In fact, he stated that from the very beginning, the plan had been orchestrated by Mr. Kim himself. That revelation prompted police to dig deeper. Seong-pil admitted to tying up and assaulting Mr. Kim, but insisted that he had only done so because Mr. Kim had asked him to. When pressed on the motive, Seong-pil explained that Mr. Kim was in deep debt at the time and wanted to stage an assault to trick the insurance company into paying out a claim. Under the terms of his insurance policy, Mr. Kim would receive $57,900 if he sustained a serious head injury. In order to collect that payout, he devised a plan to fake a violent robbery. 3 days before the incident, Mr. Kim allegedly asked Im Seong-pil to help carry out the plan and promised to give him $19,300 if everything went according to schedule. And so, on the day of the incident, the two met at the CD store as planned, bringing the necessary materials. Mr. Kim instructed Seong-pil to bind his arms and legs with duct tape first so he wouldn't instinctively try to protect himself when struck in the head, ensuring the act appeared convincingly real. According to the original plan, the two men agreed that Mr. Kim's head would be covered with a towel so he couldn't see anything. Then, a plastic sheet and blanket would be added to prevent blood from splattering. Im Seong-pil had prepared a billiard cue to carry out the staged blow, just as they had discussed. And within moments, the stick came crashing down on Mr. Kim's head with such force that it snapped in half. From that moment on, Seong-pil claimed he had no memory of what happened next. During the autopsy, however, police were forced to reevaluate the truthfulness of Seong-pil's statements. The injuries on Mr. Kim's body could not have resulted from a single blow. His skull was shattered, and multiple bones throughout his body were broken, clear evidence of a brutal and sustained beating. This led investigators to seriously question the credibility of Seong-pil's entire testimony. From the beginning, the idea that Mr. Kim had asked someone to beat him for an insurance scam seemed far-fetched. Then, during an intense interrogation session, Seong-pil unexpectedly revealed a piece of evidence that had never been mentioned before. It was a video recording, filmed by Seong-pil himself, showing him and Mr. Kim discussing the plan to fake the attack for an insurance payout. Seong-pil explained that he recorded the video as a safeguard in case Mr. Kim later tried to shift all the blame onto him. Crucially, Mr. Kim had allegedly given his consent to be filmed. Following this revelation, police searched the video store and found the tape hidden inside a tool pouch wedged in a wall crevice. What the footage revealed stunned everyone involved. Late on the night of March 1st, 1998, Mr. Kim and Seong-pil appeared in front of the camera, calmly setting their plan into motion. The scene of Seong-pil binding Mr. Kim's body with duct tape was clearly documented. In the moments that followed, Mr. Kim appeared visibly uncomfortable, while Seong Pil politely reassured him and encouraged him to endure. Shortly after, Seong Pil took a serious tone and announced he was beginning, then struck Mr. Kim forcefully on the head with the billiard cue. The stick broke in two and Seong Pil stepped out of the frame. At first, everything in the video aligned perfectly with Seong Pil's statement. But what shocked the investigators was what came next. Just a few minutes later, Seong Pil re-entered the frame, this time holding a brick. His voice had changed, filled with rage and a strange intensity. He began referring to himself as Shadow, claiming he had lived for over 100 years and had come to punish men who made their wives suffer. From that moment forward, it was as if Im Seong-pil had become a different person entirely. He repeatedly struck Mr. Kim on the head with the brick, ignoring the man's screams and pleas for mercy. Even after Mr. Kim collapsed and lay motionless, Seong-pil continued the assault until the victim showed no signs of life. The recording ended just a few minutes later. It was Seong-pil himself who revealed the existence of the video. While part of it matched his previous confession, the remainder contradicted it entirely. Police immediately detained him for further questioning and to cross-reference the footage. After watching the full recording, Seong-pil admitted to the actions at the beginning. However, when it reached the scene where the cue broke and the brutal assault began, he clutched his head in panic and insisted he remembered nothing. He claimed that a different personality had taken over, that he was no longer in control. The revelation led police to pay closer attention to the name Shadow that Im Seong-pil mentioned in the video. To their surprise, they discovered a membership card at his home that said Shadow Club, a mysterious organization of unknown origin. After an extensive investigation that turned up nothing, the police concluded that the group was fictional, possibly a figment of someone's imagination. The appearance of Shadow and Seong-pil's strange behavior in the video sparked public speculation that he might be suffering from a serious mental disorder. Many believe he was delusional, possibly schizophrenic, or even dissociative personality disorder. Forensic experts, however, are divided. They argue that if he was truly mentally ill, there should have been warning signs earlier. Meanwhile, those who knew him claim that they have never seen any strange behavior. However, in the court's view, it was all a calculated performance. The judges believed that Im Seong-pil had deliberately pretended to have a nervous breakdown in the hope of receiving a lighter sentence. The fact that he said such strange things while fully aware that he was being filmed by a camera was interpreted by the court as a staged act. The court's suspicions did not stop there. Other details of the case further reinforced their suspicions about Seong-pil's true motives. His secret obsession with Ms. A, the hidden surveillance cameras, and the fact that he spoke to Mr. Kim with an uncomfortably intimate air while harboring deep resentment, all of these suggested a premeditated plan rather than an impulsive act. Putting all the factors together, the presiding judge offered a final interpretation to justify the verdict. When Mr. Kim, whom Im Seong-pil considered an obstacle in his life, proposed a fake insurance scheme, Seong-pil saw it as the perfect opportunity to strike. With evidence of premeditation and intentionality, the court sentenced Im Seong-pil to life in prison. However, some experts have looked at the case from a different angle. If the crime was indeed premeditated and carefully staged, as the court concluded, then certain aspects do not quite make sense. Based on this, psychological analysts have suggested that Im Seong-pil may have suffered from a form of obsessive-compulsive disorder, a condition in which an individual feels a thrill from staging the death of another person and recording the entire process. Based on this theory, the debate over Im Seong-pil's true psychological makeup continues to this day. He remains in custody, but whenever asked about the case, he only says that his memories of the event have become fuzzy and offers no further explanation. What do you think about these two cases? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next story.